Okay, so in this particular session, we're going to be focusing mainly kind of like on case studies to do with sustainability, right? So a lot of what people have been asking for over the last couple of days has been, how do we sustain our festivals? How do we keep the art organizations that we have created? How do we keep them going? So we have three people who are going to be giving us some input around that. But I just wanted to maybe to get our minds focused on this. So things that have come out of the discussions over the last couple of days in terms of possible income streams. Let's just make notes of these, right? So from the public sector, there's national government, there's provincial or state government, and then there's local government as potential contributors. With regard to local government, one of the things that came out in the previous sessions was that you could pitch your festival to various cities for them to basically bid for your festival so that they put money into your festival if your festival offers them sufficient value. So from the public sector, there's the parastatals, so tourism agencies. They could be potential contributors to your festival as well. Then there's the private sector, companies that will give money to sponsor your particular event. There's the international community, the Goethe Institutes, the French Institutes, but also other international agencies that could support your work. There's the box office, ticketing, money that comes from people buying tickets to your show. But there's also, with regard to individuals, membership or subscription models, where people pay a monthly subscription fee or an annual subscription fee, and that's kind of what provides you with some kind of budget for operational costs, right? Then there are individual sponsors, individual angels, people of high net worth who may come along and say, we'd like to give so many $1,000s to your particular event. There are crowdfunding platforms, so platforms that exist where you can put your project onto a website, and there's a 3-month kind of, for example, a time framework in which people are driven towards that website and they give amounts of money to your project through a crowdfunding platform. There's in-kind support, so people might not give you money, but they can give you free venues. They can give you media support. They can volunteer their services, so that reduces your budget through in-kind support. Then there's merchandising, things that you create as a festival, as an arts organization that you are able to sell. There's secondary finance, that because your festival exists, it is able to attract others who want to make money as a consequence of your attracting an audience. So people who have stalls as a consequence of your festival, and so you derive some kind of rental fee from them as well. There are year-long events, so your festival might exist for a particular time, but because of the expertise and networks that your festival has, you may be able to offer things that happen outside of your festival event that attracts further income. And then finally, the idea of an endowment where you are raising money so that eventually you have sufficient money to invest, and that endowment and its investments and the dividends that accrue are able to cover your operational costs. So those are all different forms of income, and at how these things are applied depend on your particular context. So those are just some of the things, and now we're going to have 3 people talking to some of these things as well as others. And so Mark, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I think this is going to be, for me, I want to tell sort of a story of Under the Radar. Now, many of you have been out drinking with me late at night, so you know all these stories. But so I'll be boring you again. Under the Radar started as someone wanted to make a conference, and they gave me money to make a conference, and I took that money and I made a festival. And then they liked that, and so they kept giving me money. One of the first times I saw it, we did it. A gentleman coming from an old friend coming from the public theater, he got he got the job at a public theater. One of the first things he wanted to do is answer the downtown theater world. And that is what we were, that's what we did, which is a sort of experimental or theater that's on the edge, not necessarily playwright-driven, this kind of thing. Very small scale work. And we also did it with an international look. So it was taking a sort of spotlight or sort of a view of what we thought was going on in the field and who are the artists who are rising. So it was pretty successful, and it began to really run very well. And it became a place where these thank you. These folks, it was a big meeting place. And that was one of the values. We're going to talk about the values of Under the Radar. And the reason we were brought to the public theater is the artistic director felt he wanted to answer this downtown question. And he was, in his view of the public theater, was that it had Shakespeare, it had workshops, it trained artists. It also needed to address the downtown because our original founder always had downtown artists is part of this. Downtown is a state of mind, incidentally. Okay. So we go on. We're continuing to be funded by this larger organization and eventually they need to stop funding us because in their guidelines they weren't supposed to be funding us. So we arranged an exit grant and we became a core project of the public theater. And they took on my salary and the salary of my associates. And we started, yep. Yeah. Oh.
Well, I was curious, so in some way what had been created was an authenticity around what had been created for all of you who are watching this was some authenticity around theater from the downtown scene. And I just want to say that we frame it in those words with it. What was the value all of a sudden that made the theater want to bring in the festival? And then there's some other things as well, but I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that, and sorry for disrupting everything.
That was, essentially what we were bringing, and a lot of the work we were doing was really investigating authenticity of the theater experience. Our whole line was, why do theater now? Because it's a bespoke thing, and very expensive. Okay, so we're going along, and as you know, only about 5 weeks ago now, we were stopped by the organization that had been funding us. And our program had gotten up to about $1.5 million, including my salary and everything. And I was working off the money that they raised to fill their mission, and then a little bit of money that I knew from people around the world or around the scene that would give me money for particular productions. So I think the deal is when this went down, it caused quite a rise. It went a little bit viral, especially in the theater community. And in fact, one of the things that most touched me was that some people brought flowers and statements to the front of the public theater and laid them at the steps as though something had died. And I realized this was more than what I thought we were doing, actually. And so there was a lot of investment. And that investment, that value, was larger than the organization that had been doing it understood. And the backlash that they're going through now is, I don't envy them. It's, you know, their street cred has been down. But it's over, and we're trying to go on. And one of the things about being here is I'm, you know, I'm learning about value added, etc. And on the other side, I'm trying to start a festival from scratch. Well, it's going to be called Under the Radar, or Radar, but it'll have parts of the old thing. But I'm trying to open it up for right now. Maybe a sustainable model that's more sustainable than just one organization. In the U.S., it's, you know, we have to raise all our money every year. Rarely do we get money that goes for many years in a row. It's all the usual suspects of foundations, individuals, corporations. And so I'm here without any money trying to start a festival. I have one secret pot of money, which is the Arts Council of England actually supporting artists that are English coming to Under the Radar. And they support almost all the background and costs of those artists making it to Under the Radar. I just need to provide them a fee. So what am I missing here?
It's interesting that you said the thing about money with it, but so no money, but there's value, as seen by the memorial outside the theater and other forms of, currency.
Now we're trying to figure out how do we leverage that value into another festival. And that's, so that's my question. And my particular burden at the moment. And yeah, it's going to take us money, perhaps, to do it. I was looking at, you know, hearing about some of these festivals that are running totally on volunteers and on free tickets, and thinking, well, maybe I could do that. Maybe there's enough volunteers to run an Under the Radar festival. You know, so just I'm looking into all these different frames. I think the fact that we're looking at this value and those audiences, and also the perception, and I'm wondering whether perception, when Under the Radar is outside of the public theater, which is a very loved, you know, high-end theater in Manhattan, will it have the same effect? Will it have the same weight? Because being in the center, doing experimental theater in the center of the American theater was a big statement. So we'll see, you know.
What was your main cost? Were you providing a subsidy for all of the theatre productions that took part in your festival, or did independent theatres and so on fund their own theatres that became part of your festival?
It varied. For the most part, we were producing our own pieces for most of the years at the public theater, which has 6 stages. And I think I got that right, or 5. Whatever. In a bar, also a bar. Steps. And then we would sometimes produce things off-site, and sometimes go into collaborations with other organizations off-site. Sometimes we would umbrella, or just sort of put them in our program, the artists that we thought were appropriate for Under the Radar, but were fully produced by other organizations. One was the Japan Society. Every 2 years would do something with us.
Great. Thank you very much for that. It's a lot to learn from. Carla.
So I'll need a presentation. Elisa, dai una mano. Mark, if you want to sit here. Right, so I think that all of you know that I come from Brazil, and I'm sure that you all know where Brazil is, but I think it's important to tell a little bit more about my country. So this is kind of the size of Brazil. It's not. It's as long as it is large. So the distance between Acre and Paraíba is roughly the same as between Lisbon and Moscow. That meaning that actually we have all different realities, and it's hard to talk about Brazil, right? So we have loads of sub-Brazils inside one, regardless to the positioning they have on the map, actually. The second thing, and maybe it's easier for you all to visualize it, this is the size of the countries that would fit into the regions, so our states. So just by coincidence, I picked up three examples. One of them is from Greece, therefore the state of Ceará, and the other two are from São Paulo, where I come from. The population in the state, it's the richest state in the country, and the one with the biggest population, 44 million people. So we're not that exclusive, but it's a very diverse state in itself. And this explains a few of the things I'll tell you. So it makes sense to tell you about what I believe could be useful. So bear with me for a while, because as you know, I don't come from the festivals world. So maybe the things I'll say actually have no coherence to what you do, but I'll try. And to tell them, I actually need to do a little bit of storytelling and to put you in context. So the first example was actually run by us, and it comes from the form, the shape you see there in southern São Paulo, going towards Uruguay. And it's interesting to say that actually, as you see, it has a darker tone of green, because it's one of the best preserved areas we have in the Atlantic forests. It's actually the longest preserved area of this kind of forest, which is, in terms of biodiversity, richer than the Amazon, right? So it's one of the hotspots in the world, just to put it a little bit in context. But, okay, thank you. Yeah. But this region is actually very interesting because it's crossed by a river called Ribeira, 430 kilometers long, that crosses two states. And many historians say that it's actually where colonization started. It was right over, it should be crossed by the Treaty of Tordesillas, which split South America between Spain and Portugal. So none of the guys actually knew who it belonged to, and they didn't want to, go against the other in case. So, but then the first cycle of gold started from here, exploring the river. For all different historical reasons that don't come to debate, it was actually frozen as a region, kind of isolated for more than a century, after all this effervescence and richness, which led the cities around to have the richest architectural heritage in the state of São Paulo. But the only communication was actually through the river. There were no roads. So once the river was no more navigable, we actually had to, we put it in isolation, even though all the transportation and richness that crosses Mercosur, therefore the southern cone of South America, goes through the road that crosses this valley. So just to tell you a little bit about this place. And it has a huge, marvelous cultural diversity. The caiçaras, as we call the people who depend on the sea and the river to live, mainly the sea, used to have loads of art crafts related to special wood that, for, again, all different reasons, all of a sudden was forbidden to take from the forest. So these guys saw themselves as those who can no longer have a source of revenue and actually could not express their cultural diversity. It's just a few examples of what they used to do. So I have a small consultancy company. What we do is actually go to places or companies. We hardly work with governments. We avoid, but we go to places. We have a special way to read the context, and then we spot opportunities and show the ways to, take advantage of them. That's what we do. We had run a project in this region. We fell in love with the region. So we decided to do something for the region. And as you see, there is a small kind of island that splits the continent to the sea. And in a in a beach. Next slide, please, Elisa. In a beach that is maybe 200 meters long. All the trees and branches coming from the river through these 400 kilometers are actually deposited. And due to a very bad environmental intervention more than 100 years ago, the branches actually don't go to the river. They stay on the beach. For the fishermen, it's a disaster because obviously it's a problem. But when their wood was forbidden to be taken away from the forest, they said, you know, there's plenty of wood there, even though it's obviously a different kind of wood. So we went after the approval from the environmental agency to get the local guys to go there and start working on this wood. And for this, and that's my boy, by the way, 2 years ago. And then we decided to launch an invitation for those living in the area who wanted to learn how to work with this wood, thanks to a very crafted woman who works actually with this kind of wood. But the region had so many demands and so many needs that we decided that this project in some way would actually cover the costs of a second project. So the agreement we had, and I think this is the trick, the agreement we had with the now new sculptors is they would learn how to work on the wood. On purpose, thanks to the biodiversity I've just mentioned, we had a kind of a dial of the loss of biodiversity. So a few of the guys chose animals who are already extinct, the other who are still abundant, and the other in the middle. As you see, you know, different fishes and so forth. But the agreement we had with them is that their first work would be put on a bid. And the money we raised from the bid actually worked to buy electronic equipment that's now being used for the first web radio run by young people in the region. So it was actually an excuse producing something that would then be sold for a second project that would have no money for, because there were no sources of funding. So I think that the main taken from this specific project is how can we produce something that can then be sold, can be produced collectively, and maybe it's something that the festivals can do too, and then this work of art, whatever, is sold to fund something else, or even the next edition of the festival, just as a thought. The second project has nothing to do with us, from friends of ours. We only work with them in congresses and so forth, so none of this is actually my merit, and it's a festival, the Jazz and Blues, that comes from that part of Brazil that would be Greece, you see in the northeast. Just to put you in context, this is where they are. So a tiny city of 5,000 people called Guaramiranga, 100 kilometers away from Fortaleza, which you may have heard of Fortaleza, astonishing beaches, 6-hour flight from Lisbon, so many people go there, especially foreigners. But when we get there, lobsters, sand, etc., nobody gets into the countryside. So they stay in Fortaleza, and the only thing they know of Ceará, the state of Ceará, is Fortaleza. And it's actually a problem. It's especially a problem during Carnival, because those who do not like Carnival rhythms are forced to listen to Carnival rhythms all the time. They have no choice. And the special thing about this tiny place is that during the coffee cycle, it was very prosperous. But then we had a clash, and most of the young people migrated to Fortaleza. Those who remained in city actually had the self-esteem that was absolutely a disaster, also in terms of the tax of suicide. So they were just left with the idea that they were good for nothing, therefore not even to go to Fortaleza with all its problems. So two cultural producers, this is where it stands. It's, as we call, a massive. The two cultural producers who started this project more than 20 years ago decided to do something specifically on Guaramiranga. And everybody said, you are completely crazy. You are nuts, because there's nothing here that will attract people to come. And then they started also dealing with different kinds of problems. The example, the case in itself should deserve maybe 2 or 3 hours of details. But the things I'd like to stress, first one, even though it's a tiny place, it's circled by another set of tiny places. And all the other tiny places said, why Guaramiranga and not here? Why are you building a festival on jazz and blues in Guaramiranga and not here? So they were pretty jealous. And obviously, tourism infrastructure was not big. There was a hot dog seller at the end of the first festival that we had just bread, no more sausages, just for you to have an idea. They have no place where to, no hotels actually, maybe one or two hostels. So they started knocking at the door of those who used to have coffee farms. And in many different occasions, the parents were there. So they said, okay, you can camp here. And that's how it started. So they offered the other cities the idea to have a built joint calendar. So for those who won't be able to attend Carnival in Guaramiranga or the Jazz and Blues in Guaramiranga, what are you offering? And it was a very interesting collaborative work, even though we also have those political feudos, and people say, okay, I won't work there because I don't like the party of the other mayor. The guys working in tourism or aspiring to work in tourism didn't really care about that. So they started working together, and it was a kind of a seed of an institution that is currently working very well, also carries on, because they had this common interest. So joining the strengths of small places who had individually nothing to offer was one of the things they found out. The other one is on the right side. You have the main square with two peaks. So there are two churches there. The other thing was, in principle, it's something for the city, right? Not for tourism. So we want to use the tourists to bring something to the city. But how can it be for the citizens if the theater we are going to kind of build is closed? And it needs to be closed because the sponsors want to have a private space for their guests, blah, 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 blah. So what they ended up doing is all the rehearsals are open space and the representations are inside the theater. So this is one of the things. Then the other thing is Guaramiranga, as I said, has... Oh, can you please just come back to 2 slides? As I mentioned to you, one more. Thank you. Guaramiranga, in our terms, is very close to Fortaleza, 100 kilometers just around the corner, So we said, how can we actually justify to sponsors that 5,000 people, and during the festival, the number increases to 15,000, will be worth its sponsorship thanks to the regular indicators we use, because the cost per 1,000 is absurdly low. So they had this Robin Hood idea. The festival goes through a long carnival, therefore from Saturday through midday on Wednesday. And then it goes to Fortaleza. Big population, loads of money, loads of media coverage, and therefore Fortaleza pays for Guaramiranga because they put all numbers together. So sometimes it's also a Robin Hood strategy that may work in a few occasions. In this case, this worked very, very well. The other thing, also just a comment on indicators, they managed to catch the attention of an institution that is one of their funders, which works with small and medium-sized companies. And the way they managed to catch these people's attention is basically they run a survey showing how many new companies started off, sometimes informally, and then after a few years, formally. So you see the importance of these small companies. And they did this through the survey asking, how old are you as a company? And it worked pretty well. So they are constantly trying to come up with new indicators to try to show that they have more value than the price they charge, but through more kind of rarely considered indicators approach to different kinds of values. The third brief example I'd like to bring is called Black Market. And the Black Market started off 20 years ago. I'm very new to it. I've just been invited to be part of their board. But it actually emerged from an entrepreneur called Adriana Barbosa, who used to work in multinational companies, doing all kinds of work, etc., etc. But with the strength of the black population in Brazil. And she started organizing a market of entrepreneurs who are black. And then it started evolving, because obviously there's no point in organizing a market not talking about culture, because the culture we have coming from all different subcategories of population in Brazil, and specifically in São Paulo, was huge. So they smartly incorporated culture in everything they were doing. Just to give you an idea, this over 20 editions, they actually managed to gather 200,000 people, around $1.5 million of revenues of the sales of each individual entrepreneurs, more than 2,000 exhibitors, 4,000 artists, blah, 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 blah. So the numbers per se are obviously very appealing, but they managed to do more than that. So what were they doing actually? They decided that they would become a platform. And by platform, they meant everything you can imagine, from incubators of new entrepreneurs to one of the things that I think could be maybe suitable for you, which is side festivals. So one of the festivals, as self-esteem is not necessarily the biggest thing they have there in this category of entrepreneurs, is called Festival Black Potência, is powerful. And it's the festival of resignification of inconcluded abolition. Because we always say that abolition in Brazil was legally approved, but not economically or socially. So decided it was time to discuss it again, or discuss it for once. And this side festival, actually it works as, as again, the Robin Hood perspective. So you get money from one of the projects and it pays for the platform, the whole platform. But one of this, just a few pictures on what they do. So mainly to up those, okay, you can go on ahead. Yeah. So this is the biggest open air cinema or festival in the world. And these guys, realizing how powerful Feira Preta was, decided to give it a day. So one full day is devoted now to, and through these all kinds of these partnerships, Adriana and the team managed to have more visibility. So now when you say Feira Preta is wow, but for 15 or 16 years, she was struggling to pay the bills. And even today, as they do many things that are actually paying by themselves, they find a hard time making ends meet, but they are slowly growing. And the last slide from this presentation I'd like to bring is they, and this is something I've been emphasizing a lot for them, they actually became the reference for everything that has to do with the Black population in Brazil. So they started producing pieces of research in association with a research institute. So we are conscious, we are many, because half of the population in Brazil is Black, and we are very strong. So trying to take away all the prejudices people would have towards this population. And in the end, one of the things we really see as a strength is the fact that they know this population much better than anybody else. So why can't themselves become a research institute? And maybe this is something that if you could actually take into account. So if you are the reference in the kind of population you're dealing with, can't you actually be a reference for research? Partnering or not with a research institute or having someone in your team, because for instance, the black market in Brazil is amazingly one of the least known we have in the country. And I'm sure that many are talking about queer population and many more. I'm sure that you know much better this category of people than many companies, and they are very much willing to get to know more. So, or young people or kids or whatever. The last example I'd like to bring, and then we go to the website, is a project we decided to develop in a partnership between my small company and a company of friends who are IT developers, and it's called Cultural Calculator, because we realized all of a sudden that the government of the state of São Paulo was asking the cultural producers to estimate on the economic impact of their projects, and they had no clue at all about what's economic impact. So we got seed money from the government itself. We applied for the first time to one of their calls, and they used this money to develop this website, which is for free and online. And what it does, more than the number per se, what it does, it goes through the whole process of economic evaluation. So it guides the producer, so he can actually get to a number and tell the government, okay, I generate this amount of money. In all different categories, blah, blah, blah. But obviously, when we have a less commercial project, the economic impact tends to be much smaller. And we didn't want these guys to eventually, when they realize that they do have an economic impact, for the fact that it was low, they would say, I'm worth nothing because I have no economic impact, because it would be quite the opposite message to the one we're looking for. So we decided to go to Elisa, if you managed to move to Outros Impactos. Yeah, that's the one. So we developed in the same tool along the way a different thing that is not really a number, but it's a set of questions across all different dimensions. So you may not have a strong economic impact, but you may have a strong educational impact or environmental impact or social impact. And we, again, guide the person through a kind of a dial for all different questions. And then obviously, through the calculation, the person ends up with a graph saying, I'm very slender here, but doesn't really care because it was not supposed to have an environmental impact. But my project dialogues a lot with education, and I'm good because I'm very strong here. So it's a kind of a self-check thing to see if the project is really delivering what the person was proposing to deliver. And obviously it's in Portuguese, and it was based on our context. But in case it's inspiring for you and you want to browse it and you have any difficulties with the language, just let me know and I can translate a little bit for you. And the interesting thing is being free and more focused on the process than on the number itself, though obviously the question is always about the number. Many different institutions in Brazil are now trying to adapt it to their own reality. So I think it's bringing more evidence for cultural workers themselves that what they do is not going to a company with a hat saying, could you please give me a little bit of money? But actually, if I have a company, if I know of a company that invests a lot in education, and she or he doesn't know how to do it in a different way, I can actually arrive there, knock at the door and say, I can solve your problem. Instead, I'm here to ask for money. So it gives new paths to try to raise funds in different institutions that in principle would not be worried about culture, but using in a good way culture as a tool to get there. So that's it, I think. The last thing I just like to mention, it's no longer in place, but it was a project run by an astonishing lady called Tui Te Hau in New Zealand. And it may sound like a heresy for many of you, but she was actually in charge of the first incubator of startups for museums and national galleries in New Zealand. And what does this mean? That Te Papa, which is the national museum there, fabulous museum, wanted to be closer to startups, to use virtual reality, augmented reality, whatever, management of data, blah, 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 for a better use in management or in the attraction of new audiences for the museum. So they launched this program called Mahuki, and Mahuki in Maori means something like you can see beyond what's visible, which is what they say their ancestors used to navigate everywhere, including to Chile. So eventually they launched this call, and they had around, if I'm not wrong, 12 startups incubated into the museum, using the museum as a laboratory for their minimum value proposition. They received seed money for these 8 weeks or so, and Te Papa had 6% value share of their business. So for those who'd work, the business case for the museum would actually be that they would be less dependent on government sources, which is always a problem in all different countries, north or south. So would it make sense for you to be kind of a laboratory for new endeavors? And then in a way, maybe you wouldn't have a venture of these endeavors, but you'd in a way benefit from themselves. You'd have an agreement that if it works okay, and then after 3 years of incubation, they would have 5 years of free presentation, whatever. So it's kind of, how can I invest in you and you invest in me afterwards?
Just doing my exercise. Thank you very much, Carla. And I think it kind of goes back, particularly some of the last slides that you showed, to what Rashmi was talking about this morning in terms of what is your value proposition. A lot of the time, people who give money want to know what the economic impact is. But increasingly, people also want to know what the other kind of impacts are. What is your social impact? What is your environmental impact? And the like. So if we have calculators that can help us to do that, then great. So please translate that into English as well so that we can come along and use that too. Our last kind of input provider is Gintare.
So hello, I'm happy to be here and to share some practices I do. So I run 2 festivals. Both of them are very different in scale and budgeting and the way we do. One is 26 years old, Contemporary Dance Festival, which is a key event in a country, but also in the Baltic region. And another one, it's quite new, fresh. We started in 2019, so this year is going to be the 5th edition. And we started as a part of Europe Capital of Culture. Now we're starting the real journey of a festival because the funding, disappeared. So last year we had the Europe Capital of Culture, and now we're going to this, I say, Lithuanian scale, Lithuanian festival scale. Instead of being big and brave, we're going to, from 1 month, we're coming back to 9 days. So I can share some examples we do and how we're trying sometimes to reduce the budget and to use resources which already exist to share the content of our festivals with other events and how to co-finance, our activities. So from being very active actually in applying for all possible funds in a country, we do, we go for Council of Culture funding with both festivals. We also use all resources we can think about in our cities, in Kaunas and Vilnius. There's one capital, another one is second biggest city. When we think, about the different programs we have in the festival and how can we apply for these programs from different resources. We don't make one application for a festival. We actually split a festival in smaller programs, education program, workshop program, touring program in a region, which is like the finances comes also from international funding, from mobility grants, which comes straight to artists. And then we combine with our partners. For example, this year we had a really nice collaboration with 2 partners in the region. Partners in the region, they are really willing to join our festival. They want to have contemporary dance in their programs. And we did a lot of work to make it happen. We branded a dance festival as a thing, as something cool, as something what is really interesting now, and everyone should see it. We worked a lot, actually, and still working through different marketing campaigns and different projects during COVID. And if you are interested, I can show some examples, also digital including. So we made it somehow to happen, but now contemporary dance in Lithuania is a thing. Everyone wants to see it. And we linked it with like democracy, freedom, creativity, expression, experience, everything what is boiling around. Creative industries, inspirations for creative industry people, for example, for startuppers and so on. We created community around it. So I have a list now of all regional partners who want to jump in, but because we have a very small team, we cannot do it. It's impossible. Our technical team is small, our human resources are very limited, so now we have to choose with whom we work, and our plan is like to have this program touring from one place to another, not to stick with one partner every time. So this year we collaborate with 2 events which are very different. One is International Fringe Festival happening in very tiny place close to the border to Latvia, and they have a budget, but they don't, they couldn't have enough resources to have international content, so we offered them one project to bring to the place, and they covered some expenses, not all, but still it's good for us because it's a shared resources. Another one city was celebrating 100 years anniversary, and they were creating cultural program around the year, and we proposed to bring contemporary dance program. So they built it like new Baltic dance in a place. It's called Ukmergė. It's a nice title of a town. And they actually, what they did, they have chosen 3 shows from our program by themselves. Actually, of course, they have to check technical things, but we can bring, And they applied for funding to co-finance this program, and we shared 50-50. So for us, it was this festival is traveling. We're giving more chances for artists. And for example, in this program, we had one project from Sweden, and Swedish company got mobility funding just because we gave more, performances in different places than in Vilnius. And it's always win-win situation. For artists, for audience, for us, also for culture workers who works in the region. So we're really trying to work like this and include them to be part of our festival, being a real partner, not just receiving, but actually contributing, but making all the things, all the job we have to do, with audience, with promotion, and so on. So this is one example. We also work a lot, actually, with Creative Europe program. This is a program, it exists in Europe, and it's, there is a chance actually to get support to keep sustainability of the office, to pay some salaries, and to cover some activities of your festival. Sometimes I have experience in being wrong, in the wrong projects, which cost a lot of energy, or like you have to contribute a lot, but actually it's not giving a lot of benefits for your projects and yourself. But also we have a very interesting projects we run now. For example, we are part of two Creative Europe programs. One is called Aerowaves, which is small scale in terms of financing, but it's huge in terms of networking. It's 40 members across the Europe who selects 20 most interesting young emerging choreographers, and then you have to present 3 of them in your festival. And it comes with budget, but you have to co-finance. You have to show 50% of financial contributions, and they give you 50%. But what does it mean, when you work in this way? It means interact your program, artistic choices, because you're not very free what you want to do. You have to choose from the pool artists which are selected. So all these fundings, most of the time, comes with compromises regarding your program, your festival vision, what you want to do. Another one is also another is called Big Poznan Alliance. We work with 11 huge festivals in Europe, like Julie Dance, Dance in August, Dublin Dance Festival, Umbrella Dance Festival in London, Oslo, and so on. And what it gave for us, it's actually raise our brand as a festival in European level. Even our budget comparing with other festivals is super small. And for us to keep the track on this project is really tough financially as well. But actually, because of this funding, we can present in our program more bigger scale companies, which is also challenging, of course. But at the same time, I can cover some salaries, I can cover some technical expenses, I can also put under the budget some PR, expenses, and it's like balance my budget. Another thing what we do is like shared expenses with partners, for example, venues. We don't have so much experience in it because it's not like the thing to do in Lithuania, but sometimes if you bring really big scale production, like last year we brought Dimitri Papaioannou, and the budget of this project is the same like my festival budget. So we had to share, I had to convince Opera and Ballet House what is valued for them to have this name on the stage. It's something what you cannot do alone. I invested like 4 years to really build the network with a team, with Dimitri's team, with himself, with a manager, and to ask him kindly paying some fee to include Lithuania on the tour map, because he is so famous, but he's not need to go to Lithuania. There's not enough time, actually. You have to kick someone out from the planning, because there's a structure how they plan. So I worked it a lot to convince the venue, because there's no other venue to do it, and also the company to come. And it was an agreement almost 50-50, so they gave venue for a week, they gave technical support, not all, because they had to rent it, but I'm paying rest of the expenses, and then income shared according to, how much you put in the budget. And when we received, this incomes from the ticket sales, I could co-finance my rest program. So this was a plan to have a big name, but also to share expenses. Some small things we tried, and it worked with this new festival. We actually proposed some performances from our curated program to, for example, to one shopping mall. And it's because we bring outdoors, indoors, we use unconventional spaces for performances. And we said, we have this show, which is very accessible for a general audience, and maybe you would love to pay, a fee for a few shows. So instead of 3, we will do 2 at your place, and 1 we will do outside, and we will do in your place. So the shopping mall covered actually all the expenses of the company. So we could, also increase our program, use a new space, reach a new audience, and it was win-win situation for both of us. Another practice, which is now, it's like my colleagues in Latvia, they're practicing, and actually from next year we want to try with our festival. We are planning to do the same this year, but it was a time management thing we couldn't manage. To convince big companies actually to buy one of the, to cover, like not to buy, yes, to buy a show for their, clients, employees, and to have this private showing before the festival. So it means we're bringing big name, which is already programmed in a program, and we're having, before the festival opening, we're having this event with a company. And then we cover expenses. I don't need to pay a fee for company, but maybe I just need to cover 2 days, rent and so on and so on. And now it's getting more popular, and I see what some examples are very successful, actually, this kind of collaboration with banks, with other big companies. So it's like a shared also, like a shared budget. Then we have this question, when we work with international funding and all this Creative Europe funding about, so who contributes to whom, project contributes to festival, or festival contributes to the projects. It's a big conversation going on around our partners of Creative Europe during our festival network, because sometimes it's like really, you have to be very aware of how many artists you already have on your list through the projects. So I have 3 during Aerowaves program, and I have at least 2 through Big Pulse Dance Alliance program. This means 5 artists. And what can I do, how I can build a program around it? Should I do it or should not, So it's always about, thinking what is really needed for you, and is it goes together with your artistic vision, what you want to do, what kind of shows you want to bring to your audience. So just to be aware what comes with money from somewhere, not just from private sponsors, Let's see what they're having. Yeah, I think it's like, we also have this, the new festival, which is going to start in a few weeks, on July 29. So from very beginning when we started, we thought about this, how we can include audience who is new, and most, like our festival is, has 2 programs. One is free events, another one is with tickets. We always thought, and I'm like 100% sure, that people have to pay for culture experience, and they have to experience of what does it mean to pay. And we work a lot with ticket prices. I play a lot with it. I see how it works, what kind of audience you can bring with different prices, and it's really interesting. This year, for example, we managed to reach completely new audience by increasing ticket prices. And people who are willing to pay, actually, but we're not coming to the festival because the prices are too low. It's very sometimes it's very simple, you have to give them a chance to buy a ticket, and people are buying. So we started this initiative, a friend ticket. So there's a few options of the price. So you can pay, like, you can choose how much you pay to the festival. And we always, announce before the free events, but there's an option to do it if you want to support us. Because all the money goes to artists, all the money, goes to the festival development. And it's a lot about advocating in front of the audience, just making them sure. But is it like, it's the, when we started this new festival, we started to talk, we're not doing this festival for ourselves. It's not what we should do. It's actually doing because we believe it's needed for you, actually. You don't maybe know yet. But it's like, it's something you will discover what is very, value for you, for your place, for your region, what you will see the city differently, you will discover the city differently. So we trying to encourage them to contribute somehow, being part of it, and if they want to pay this, to buy this ticket, they buy. It's slowly growing. It's not like hundreds and hundreds. I think that, yeah, they're mainly the 80s.
Great, thank you very much. So just in terms of this session, looking at different ways in which festivals can generate income, as outlined at the beginning and from the examples that we've heard, institutional links, as Carla was talking about, university, maybe attach your festival or at least part of your festival to a university, let them pay for some of the research. If you have ideas about innovative ways to generate income, we have about 10 minutes or so for you to come and sit here and do it to the camera. But other examples that Gintare was talking about was people subsidizing tickets for other folk, strategic relationships with shopping malls, strategic relationships with corporates where they pick up some of your finances and the like. So those are the very practical things that we're looking for at the moment. Gregor? Over here. Just be aware of the camera, that's why you need to sit there. Okay, with the microphone.
Okay, hello. It's maybe in prolongation what Gintare just said, but we, in Switzerland, we had different, so I'm talking about performing arts as well, contemporary dance and theater, and we had different price categories for our selling. It was very complicated and it worked with legitimation, so who has right of a reduction? And at some point we inversed the whole thing and we fixed 3 price categories and the audience chooses what they pay. So without any discussion, legitimation or whatever. And it had it provoked 2 major differences. First, income increased. So not only in a pure financial way, but also we had more audience members. And one of the big differences is that actually people really jump from one category to another. Sometimes they have money, sometimes they are more interested. And the second thing, and I think it's more, and it goes beyond the money value, is that actually the relationship to your audience is completely different. So they have the authority about the money and they decide what it's worth. So it's not the discussion about what do I pay for that, but what it's worth to me. And now this actually is very popular in Brussels and it got labeled pay what you can. And so generally there are 3 prices fixed, a normal price, a reduced price, and the lover's price. And you choose which one you apply.
But you choose before or after the show?
No, you choose before the show. Yeah. So in that practice you choose before. And it's also not entitled to pay what you want. So it's not a free choice that I just pay 1 or 2. No, it's the categories also in function of the production are fixed before, and then you, yeah.
So, thank you. Two reactions. One is just to ask, when, like, I was approached by the Kenya National Theatre to join the theatre and the festival, to be part of the theatre, but I saw it as a risk in one hand, because the current director will not be there for long, so I sort of went for an agreement, but ensuring that the festival remains independent from the theatre, so that in the event that they say that there's no longer funding for this, then we are not at limbo. We are not left like the festival has died. And now on Carla is what made the difference for the festival in Brazil for 15, 16 years? They were not able to pay their bills. So what is it that they did to transform that and to be one of the biggest, and have a lot of revenue? And then in terms of what we are doing in terms to like transform the institution that is the festival, is that number one, we have partnered with a university. They're providing us with land, and we're supposed to resource mobilize to construct a theater hub, the first theater hub in East Africa. So what we'll have is an auditorium, as residency, accommodation, rehearsal space, and this will be like a hub for people within the region to come and practice theater. And what we are looking is looking at a sustainable model, because from where I sit, I know there's a lot of demand for space because we don't have professional theater spaces, and I've seen that as an opportunity for revenue for the festival. And the university has agreed to give us the space to do that. So we're just getting into resource mobilization. And secondly, again, with the platform you saw for theatre.co.ke, the online platform, is that we're also trying to enter into the ticketing business. Because right now, a lot of people are moving into digital ticketing, so that if we're able to raise that 10% from people who are selling tickets, then we're also able to raise money for the trust to be able to pay its salaries. I just wanted to share those. And then research with the publication is that there are no, like for the last 10 or so years, very few plays have been published in the country. And that is another gap that we've seen that we can tap into and even sell these books to institutions, to universities, and that is the kind of model and the opportunities that we've seen within the market. Thank you.
So I love the example Kevin's just given, because again, it forces us sometimes to zoom out from our events, zoom out from our festivals, to look at the ecologies in which they take place. And what happens for the other 51 weeks of the year when maybe there are other opportunities for us. So I asked the founder of the Cape Town International Jazz Festival what he would have done now, knowing what he didn't know when he started. By the way, those of you from South Africa, that festival is not happening this year, so sustainability is a big thing for even these big events. So his answer to me was, I would have started a travel company. Why? Because for that festival, 70% of the audience came from Gauteng province around Joburg to Cape Town, and he needed to fly international artists in and out of South Africa. So he was creating, through this event, enormous economic opportunity, but outside of his organization. So especially those of us who have destination festivals, this is an interesting way of thinking. It is a risk because it can sway you from your core purpose. But this conversation about strategic partnerships and making sure that if you are creating value for the restaurant sector, the accommodation sector, the providers of transport and so on, is there a way you can organize your event so that some of that revenue can feed what's actually benefiting everyone? Now, the extreme model of this is when people choose a huge venue like a convention center and they put everything in there and they control everything. I don't love those festivals a lot. They often feel very clinical, but the reason they exist is that then you can sell the rights to everything as the event organizer. It's much harder work if you organize an event, let's say in a space like the one we're in Elefsina. Can you build the goodwill with the business chamber, with the tourism authority, et cetera, to have a similar effect for you? So it's really worth doing a bit of an audit of where your event actually has impact, even if it's outside of your core arts mandate.
Anyone else want to give a practical example? If you would not, then maybe just give each of you an opportunity to finish off the card.
No, just a thing on the pay as much as you want or you can. There was this tiny city in the middle of Brazil where 3 or 4 students decided to get together and use their own house to host alternative music performances. And sometimes they even invited people from other places, paid all the accounts, and to make ends meet, they had this small bar. Basically, when one of the tables would pay the bill, they would get more money to go to the supermarket, buy beer to offer to their second, this kind of stuff. And they were really surprised to see that people were paying more for the beers than leaving money for the musicians. Because at least in many of our contexts, what's happening is that people are so much used to understand that culture is for free, it should be for free, because they are having fun. So they're not really working, right? So they need to work. So in the end, what they did was open costs. And they say, this is what we're paying for travel, for free, for da, 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 da. And once people realized what was behind, the organization, because they have no idea of the value chain, they started giving more. So the same people. So the question of open costs can also have a play. And the other thing, just as a hint, my first book was on the economics of culture. So I studied all different methodologies. And one of the interesting things for you to maybe take a look is something called the contingent valuation method. In the contingency, because it actually has a contingency, it was used by all different institutions, like, for instance, National Theatre in Copenhagen or Musei Aperti in Napoli. And they actually establish, they run a survey. For instance, in Copenhagen, they received a huge chunk of the government's budget for theatre. And they even themselves were actually criticized by other theaters because those guys are getting most of the thing. So they ran a survey with people from the city, even those who did not attend the theater, to ask how much would you be willing to pay for the theater not to cease its activities? And that was the contingency. And sometimes people actually reply, I've never been, I was born here, I've never been there, I do not want to go, but I want it to be a legacy for maybe my great-grandchildren, or because I know it's important for the image of the city. So much more than how much I would pay because I'm a user, or I'm a potential audience. Sometimes even those who did not attend wanted to pay. So in the end, they just calculated, they had a good sample, blah, blah, blah. So they just calculated how much the taxpayers were willing to pay. And it was more than the budget they were receiving from the government. So it was kind of shut down to those who were criticizing, including the government sometimes. And it actually has to do with your point that actually Mike emphasized, because they ran a similar research in Fez. People in Fez said, we are paying for the preservation of the Medina, but actually we are not, it's a World Heritage. So how much could we charge tourists who come to Morocco to pay for the preservation of the Medina? And they ran the survey with those who had afterwards, who had visited the Medina, those who had not. And obviously those who visited the Medina were willing to pay more. So this is an interesting tool you may use sometimes depending on the thing, be it to organize something or not to stop doing something.
I know you're good.
No, I don't really know what to say.
What's the question or the the prompt?
Closing remarks or great knowledge.
None of those. No, I think I'm good. I think I will end up repeating what others are saying, and that is the last thing I want to do.
Yeah, I think, this whole forum is about trying to think outside our boxes. And this is the time, coming out of the COVID and all of this under the pandemic, this is the time when things are shaking up. And at the same time, I see people trying to go back, of course, to what's comfortable. And matter of fact, so we're going to make safer programming because people aren't coming. And my whole thing is to try to shake that up. I don't know if this is the time or how well will be successful. All of these ideas that I hear around are so exciting to me. I mean, as far as franchising the festival, it's something of that sort. Or the three ways of the pay you what you want, but actually you got three choices. Often what you pay you want in the U.S., it's like, oh, I could come for free. That's yeah. What else?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to share a couple of things. I think just to summarize what happened throughout the morning and where we are at right now. We started with talking about value and how value is perceived. And then the work we do, it's often intangible, and how that intangibility is converted to economic value and any kind of transactional value is often informed by perception, people, your audiences, your sponsors, where they are located, and also your own innovation and creativity in making those conversations happen. I think a lot of what you heard in the second session including Christine, Mark, what Carla shared, what Gintare shared, was also about deep innovation and creativity in each of these models, where you're responsive to not just understanding what the needs of the communities are, how the audiences are perceiving value, but also where you find value. You might not be artists, but you are creative, might not be, I'm sure a lot of you are, but creative individuals who are constantly innovating, using culture, using creative goods and services. And how do you bring that back into a notion of sustainability? You can make that sustain for 1 or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. But as Christina was sharing in the morning as well, is how do you keep looking at this value proposition at various points so that you do not become irrelevant to the context that you're operating in and the actors that are funding your work, whether it's the state government, whether it's the tourism economy, whether it's your artists, whether it's people. And within all of that, what is your purpose as a cultural organization? How far away are you walking from that within this context of raising money or revenue? So these are some questions that don't have easy answers, but I think spaces like this keep allowing us to be reflexive about those questions. And what we shared with you today was just a couple of formats and frameworks to think about how to construct and articulate that value. What are the different strategies that you can use to creatively construct further transactional value out of that value, and not just connect it to money, but other ways of rethinking that value. So thank you so much to all our speakers. I know that Carla is leaving in about 5 minutes. So thank you so much for your, if you'd like to share anything before you.
No, just because I've learned no.